And greetings. Welcome to the Steve Deace Show, live and on demand here on BlazeTV, radio, and podcast. I am Steve Deace. Todd Erzin and Aaron McIntyre are here with me as well. If you would like to join us today, utilize the stevedeace.com inbox, which we will be utilizing later on for Feedback Friday. Steve at stevedeace.com. That's DEACE. You can like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at Steve Deace Show. And if you're looking for samples of this show that you can share with others and sample yourself, just go to youtube.com/Steve Deace. And again, the last name is DEACE. We welcome our good friend Shannon Joy from the People's Republic of New York State, where she remains on lockdown because of coronavirus. Why is she here? Well, because it's Friday. That means it is time for the Deace Group. Oh, by the way, Todd and Aaron, you're here too. Hey, guys.
You said that.
Mention you. Did I say that?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, let's get going then, shall we, with a review of the week that was, beginning with issue 1, Bleep Democrats Say.
I need to preach the word of God.
Until the coronavirus is resolved, criminals take a break. Okay? Stay home. Okay? Stay home. And don't commit any crimes. And that way, they'll stay safe and out of jail. And police officers will stay safe and can go home to their families. Okay? So everybody chill. Crooks, criminals, you chill. Wait till the coronavirus is over.
I will continue screaming. Would you like that? Because I'm actually finding it really, really relaxing.
Well, why don't you explain to me why what I'm doing...
Go the home.
I'm wondering if you see the potential, as some others in the party do, for a new progressive era.
Yes, forgive me for being long-winded, but absolutely we see this as an opportunity to reshape the way we do business and how we govern.
Some states are still not issuing stay-at-home orders. I mean, whether there should be a federally mandated directive for that or not, I guess that's more of a political question, but just scientifically, doesn't everybody have to be on the same page with this stuff?
I think so, Anderson. I don't understand why that's not happening. As you said, you know, the tension between federally mandated versus states' rights to do what they want is something I don't want to get into. But if you look at what's going on in this country, I just don't understand why we're not doing that.
Basically, what's happening in America is whatever happens when a family has like an alcoholic dad, and then the kids just have to raise themselves. That's what's going on in the U.S. right now. Yeah. Trump is AWOL, so the kids are just like, all right, I guess I'm just going to drive to the supermarket. Yeah.
I want to talk about this new talk of an infrastructure bill in Congress. Are you taking into consideration green jobs, green infrastructure?
Yes. If we're going to look, the COVID-4 can probably be more forward-looking at the economy. And if we're going to do infrastructure, because there's nothing better than getting the infrastructure going and going in a big, strong way, we need it big, we need it bold, and we need it futuristic, which means green.
The idea that any abortion isn't essential is medically irresponsible.
Everyone has been instructed that if they see worship services going on, they will go to the officials of that congregation. They'll inform them they need to stop the services and disperse. If that does not happen, they will take additional action up to the point of fines and potentially closing the building permanently.
I just need to keep my mouth shut for a little while.
Ain't that the truth? I mean, this guy, this has become, you know what? We'll get to him later. Okay. But for now, what was your favorite ride on the crazy train this week? Aaron, I never let you go first. I'm going to let you do it this time.
That's great, because I screwed up something with the elements today, so I was going to ask you to either go first or last, so I had time while Todd
there you go.
and
Okay.
Shannon are talking. Oh my goodness. Let's take Fauci off the board, like you just said.
That's coming up in a minute.
Yeah, because that's definitely my favorite ride on the. So I did this on purpose. The first 3 clips in the montage today, the crazy feminist, I suppose, woman with purple hair screaming about a stay-at-home order for a street preacher, and then screaming and then cursing at him, even though she's out there, which means she's violating the stay-at-home order. Contrasted with Houston's mayor saying, criminals, please just stay at home. I beg of you, please just stay at home. Meanwhile, I think it was a 20% increase in burglaries and home invasions, I believe it was in Houston now in the last, I think, week or so. That's been reported. Contrasted those 2 clips, just the man on, or woman, whatever, I don't want to assume her gender, woman on street, please criminals, stop being criminals. And then the 3rd clip, Gavin Newsom of California saying, yes, we definitely see this as an opportunity to usher in a new progressive era of business and government. Yes, that's what we're facing, America. We are being told that if you question at all any of these experts, or just want them to be questioned by other experts whatsoever, you hate old people. You hate old people. And then meanwhile, while we keep the country locked down, plunging us into probably a Great Depression, which we'll talk about later, these progressives are working not behind the scenes, right under our noses, trying to usher in basically a Green New Deal. So that is probably my favorite ride on the Democrat crazy train, from the street level on up to the governor level. It is an opportunity. That's all they see this as.
Shannon?
You know, fellas, I've been consuming so much of this idiocy for so many weeks at this point that the incoherent blather of these leftists starts to sound like Charlie Brown's teacher in the classroom, and it just goes in. But I did find myself during the CNN clip with Anderson Cooper looking at the scrolling thing around the bottom, right? Because I'm filtering everything else out, and the question that they're asking, it was from a listener: should I stop using my contact lenses in order to avoid touching my face during coronavirus? And it's just like the dumb is just so rampant that I think that one was the one that stuck out to me out of all the others.
Follow-up question. Should I not use my contact lens or wear glasses so that I don't risk touching my face? But is it then still safe for me to drive my kids at the park while we're social distancing? Right? Isn't that the next obvious follow-up from there?
Exactly. So dumb. So dumb.
Todd.
That actually happened. Thank God it's Friday. It's the first one. And not because there's zero self-awareness there with that gal in the streets screaming about breaking quarantine, but because, and I kid you not, there is zero daylight between her and what she's doing and the conservative blue checks who are yelling at people for going to church while the subways are still open. Zero daylight.
I'm glad you put Mr. Fauci in there, because the official bleep is so bad. The rest of that was not going to hold my attention this week. The rest of it simply was not going to hold my attention, given the laws of contradiction that we continue to violate, the lack of self-awareness we continue to demonstrate. The fact that the guy that wants a national shutdown could still just jump on the subway and ride it all over New York City. Well, Steve, the emergency workers, somebody immediately said that to me. Well, they kept it open for the essential emergency workers. Except I then sent them a article that was in New York City just yesterday. They're worried that the subways are overloaded, so people are getting in the way of the essential emergency workers riding them. Yeah. So that's great. You know what? Here's what I think we need to do. I think we need to get to the next issue as soon as possible. So let's do it now. Exit question. On a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being as reliable as an Imperial College survey and 10 being as reliable as President Fauci's pessimism fetish. Rate this week's level of total depravity. Aaron?
10.
10.
Shannon?
Call me Alice. I'm down the rabbit hole. It's over. It's a 10. I'm at a 10.
We finally broke her.
We did it.
We finally, the most cynical person perhaps that we could get away with putting on a platform of this magnitude has finally reached something that even she is determined we're off script right now. I have to go 10. Okay. Now, I will tell you for the first time, I am officially worried. All right. Let's get to issue 2, 240,000.
Last Sunday, the law firm of Birx and Fauci made this announcement.
In their estimates, they had between 1.5 million 1.2 million people in the United States succumbing to this virus without mitigation. Yet through their detailed studies and showing us what social distancing would do, what would happen if people stayed home, what would happen if people were careful every day to wash their hands and worry about touching their faces, that what an extraordinary thing this could be if every American followed these. And it takes us to that stippled mountain that's much lower, a hill actually, down to 100 to 200,000 deaths, which is still way too much.
Yes, as many as 240,000 Americans could die from the Wuhan coronavirus in the next few months, despite the fact that, at that time, a fraction of that amount had died with the virus worldwide. One of the new models the White House is relying on is the model from the Institute of Health Metrics and Evaluation at the University of Washington, funded by Bill Gates. Sean Davis from The Federalist decided to see if that model's day-by-day projections have been reliable so far. In the United States, the IHME model predicted on April 1st, 121,000 Americans would be hospitalized with the coronavirus. The actual number was 31,000. In New York, the IHME model predicted that on April 1st, over 50,000 New Yorkers would have been hospitalized due to the virus. The actual number was a little over 18,000. In Texas, the model predicted 1,700 people would have been hospitalized on the 1st. The actual number was just below 200. In Georgia, the model predicted 2,777 people would be hospitalized. The actual number was 952. And the list goes on and on. Steve polled his Twitter following, asking them whether they believed 240,000 Americans would be killed by the coronavirus. At just under 3,000 votes, 89.4% of his following say they don't believe that number is accurate.
Pope Fauci, the preeminent and wise, is now out there telling us, literally, as we were getting ready to do our show here today, is now out there telling us, well, the models are unreliable. This is self-parody now. Okay, this is self-parody now. We had to shut everything down based on these models. We then had to stay shut down based on these models that we now say cannot be relied upon. I don't believe, folks, I'm just going to say this out loud. I don't believe the people running this operation and running this country right now have any better data than you can accumulate if you just do your own research. I don't. And I'm going to explain to you why. I think if I'm going to make that kind of a startling claim, it's my responsibility to proffer a hypothesis that's at least somewhat reasonable as to why. Don't you?
Yes.
I'm going to give you one. Here's why. Because they trusted all of China's data at the very beginning. That's why. Because the data that we were given about its communicability rate, its transmission rate, all of those talking points all came from the WHO, which is essentially a propaganda arm of the Chinese government. We didn't follow the shutdown models, the quarantine models that Japan and South Korea and other countries that fought SARS-1 and several other viruses we haven't had to confront here in the United States, at least not at the level they have. We didn't follow their models. We immediately went with the Chinese model recommendation of shut everything down. I'm sure it was a merely altruistic recommendation by our primary economic rival in the world that we go ahead right at the dawn of spring, that we go ahead and shut our entire economy down. while theirs has been largely on shutdown, trying to deal with the virus they gave their own people, I believe, for the last few months. I'm sure it was just I'm sure they were really just looking out for us and not number one, I'm sure. And the reason why on Friday they had a press briefing last week with that same Dr. Birx and the president that made it pretty obvious they were clearing the brush to get ready for some form of a reopening like the president had teased all week. Then on Saturday, the president said, well, I think, frankly, if we just, quarantine New York City, we ought to be okay. And then on Sunday, it's abandon hope, all ye who enter. I'm well aware of Donald Trump's mercurialness. We all are by this point. He's been our president for several years now. We see it on Twitter. We get it. We've all made our peace with it. Some of us love it. Some of us don't. Some of us don't care, provided he does a good job, right? But we all know that there is a chaotic nature, and he likes that kind of chaos to some degree, right? Even by Trumpian standards, that's Linda Blair-esque levels of ground shifting. And here's why that is the case, I believe. They don't have any reliable data. The only reliable data that we actually have is what we're doing now, that we're actually mass testing our own people. Don't ask me why it took this long to get to be able to mass test our own people, yet they can use your cell phone right away to make sure you're social distancing. I have no good answers as to why that is the case, but I don't have good answers to lots of things that don't make any sense these last few weeks. That would be another one. And so we ran out there on Tuesday, largely extrapolating the data we had gleaned from New York City's mass testing, because that's where half of all testing in the United States has occurred up until this week was in New York City alone. So we're just prorating that data to the rest of the country, because the whole rest of the country is 48 square miles of 16 million people living on top of one another, breathing on each other, riding the subways, the trains, the buses. The whole country's like that. Same smoking rate, everything. The whole country is that, or not. And I don't believe they have any clue what they're doing. I think the president is now, I think he's besieged now. I think he is besieged by rival groups of bureaucrats who all don't want the blame on their hands whenever this thing is finally done and resumption resumes, if, by the way, that ever actually happens. I know the vice president gave a call yesterday to conservative leaders around the country. One person who was on that call told me it was like listening to a ticket counter person at a podunk airline who just keeps moving back your delays until they just cancel your flight. Oh, we hope by the end of May, maybe. They don't know. All right, the cliff they thought they were going to saw 2 weeks ago, we got a cliff, but it wasn't the end of the world cliff, and they can't figure it out. So the only thing now the bureaucrats are just doubling down. Just keep moving it back, because it's coming. That's why I believe we have seen the events of the last couple of weeks, and I don't believe they have any better data than somebody who knows how to do this professionally or somewhat, or at least somewhat properly, could just simply research on their own. I spent a year in community college. I got thrown out of college because they don't hand out degrees for Super Tecmo Bowl and eating Lucky Charms for 3 square meals a day. I have sat here and just with a little research and help of people who are smarter than me have destroyed how many of their talking points for the last couple of weeks? Pretty much all of them, guys. And it's not because I'm smarter than them. It's because they don't know what they're doing. And nobody wants to just flat out admit this. And now it's in the country. And frankly, there's nothing we can do now. And now you're seeing the pivot. Forgive my rant, guys. I'm going to let you go off, I promise. Now you're seeing the pivot I warned you about the last couple of weeks. Suddenly, CBS News is concerned about the lack of, boy, look what's happened to the ag business. I tweeted that out earlier today. Now they're concerned that we're going to have a shortage because we're right in the middle of what here in farm country? Planting season. Guess what is not going on in a lot of places? Not as much planting as they were doing because the labor force is entirely shut down. So it's basically what you can do on your own. Well, we're going to have a food shortage in the fall. ABC News suddenly wants to admit that, well, we put 4.5 million people from China in the country. There's probably nothing we can do. Suddenly they're concerned about the immigration laws. Maybe we should. So ABC News is now concerned we should have stopped these people from coming. See, now they're making the pivot. They're making the pivot now. And by the way, can someone tell me where are all the media stand-ups like 100 yards outside the hospitals in New York City?
There you go.
Like we get every time there's a mass shooting or a terrorist attack. Why aren't we getting that? You know what? No one answer that question because all the answers would probably get us all banned from every platform. But I'm just asking questions. Okay? They don't. So now you're going to see the grand pivot now. Right? And Trump is now besieged by different factions of bureaucrats, none of whom want to be blamed for whatever this ultimately turns out to be. But the problem is we let it into the country now. And let me tell you what the data does show. Once you let it into your country, there's almost nothing you can do to stop it. And you're going to largely get the exact same results if you do targeted shutdowns compared to and trying to end your way of life, which is what we are doing right now. Literally nothing changes.
It's a virus. That's what a virus means. So I need to interject.
No,
that.
You know what? That's good. It's good that you did that. Let me just stop and let you guys go because we got about a good 7 or 8 minutes. So everybody gets their turn now that I took 10. All right, go ahead.
Well, that's not defeatist. That's just how viruses work. They spread. Viruses spread. I don't know how the epidemiologists don't take that into account. And these models that we're talking about, the IHME model, that's supposedly the gold standard, that goes out towards August, but really it tapers down to about July 1st. It only goes out to August, and then as Dr. Fauci says earlier this week that once the new cases and new deaths are down to 0, that's when we can actually relax social distancing. That's going to be years and years and years, guys.
That's the same Dr. Fauci, by the way, that's telling people who have HIV that provided they have deteriorated the virus enough in their bodies that they no longer test positive, they're free to go have sex with other people with HIV, but the rest of us have to sit here and be shut down until we have a total baseline of 0 with coronavirus.
And here's the other pivot that you're seeing, and you're going to see another one here in the next couple of weeks as well. Dr. Deborah Birx yesterday during the press conference, the Coronavirus Task Force press conference, saying essentially, you yokels, you stupid damn yokels are not doing a good enough job at flattening the curve. And we're not seeing that. We've seen the curve flattened in Italy and Spain. We know it can do here, but we're not seeing that yet. And it's because you guys aren't social distancing good enough. I said anyway, that was going to happen because that's the Faustian thing. That's the Faustian play here. And then once we see the numbers and cases start going down, which they already are, if you believe New York City's data, which is suspect, and that's another story as well. They're already going down. Once it starts to go down across the board, then they'll get up there and say, "See, we told you, plebeians. We told you, plebes, that this was going to happen. That we saved you from yourselves." That's what's going to happen here because all of these people, they're not supposed to be making the public policy decisions.
That's right.
They're way in over their skis. They are not over their skis as far as maybe the figuring out what the are not of coronavirus is. They're way over their skis. And the guys, the id that you have to have, or just ignorance at best that you have to repeatedly say, as Dr. Fauci has this week, that it is inconvenient from an economic standpoint to take the measures that we're taking. Guys, he's out of touch at the very best, out of touch. And that should be a slap in the face to every single American. It's inconvenient. I'm sorry. No, it's something else. It's not inconvenient.
Shannon.
Well, here's another angle. I'm getting prepared, and I think everyone in the country should be prepared for this to go to a pretty dark place because there's nothing, in my opinion, more dangerous than powerful bureaucrats backed into a corner. And I have 3 things right here. You asked if they're going to hit that number, 240,000, 200,000. And with the way that they're reporting COVID deaths here in New York State, and I believe across the country, they will indeed hit their numbers because they're beginning to manipulate that data. And I have 3 sources right here. The National Vital Statistics System. This is how they code deaths in the United States of America. and it's used to collect data. On this recommendation, they're sending out to hospital systems. COVID-19 deaths should it be reported on the death certificate for all decedents where the disease is caused or is assumed to have caused or be contributed to the death. And they're telling hospital systems to code deaths even if it's just assumed COVID. This is an executive order put out by both of these were put out on March 24th of this year. Andrew Cuomo. It's a broad and sweeping executive order that loosens all of the reporting requirements for hospitals, ERs, and medical centers in New York State. And basically, it allows them to really relax all of the reporting standards, specifically those ones requirements to maintain medical records that accurately reflect the evaluation and treatment of COVID-19 patients. So you could have people being determined to have COVID-19, but no reporting or record keeping. And this is from the CDC themselves. So if you look at the CDC numbers that they release every day, at the bottom, the asterisk says data includes both confirmed and presumptive positive cases of COVID-19. So there's absolutely no evidence in New York State or anywhere in the country that they're actually testing people who are being declared deceased from COVID-19. And yesterday on my Twitter account, I released an absolutely astounding audio recording of an interview of a woman who lives just 40 minutes down the road from me here in Rochester, New York. And she is saying emphatically that she had to fight with health officials in order to get her son, who passed away, sadly perished, tested for COVID-19. They wanted just to determine it a COVID-19 death. And the only reason that they were able to get that test was because the doctor in that small town refused to sign off on the death certificate until there was a test. And so there is a great fraud happening here. And I believe if they want to get to those numbers, they're going to. But it's not going to be because they're COVID-19 deaths. It's because they're going to be taking people who have lower respiratory distress syndrome and perish from that. And they're just going to classify them as COVID-19. We have to be ready for that.
Italy admitted a few weeks ago to the London Daily Telegraph that they were doing a largely similar methodology. Todd, you've got about 90 seconds to 2 minutes.
Just going to remind you, we were given the best possible pandemic we could have hoped for. It doesn't randomly pick off children. It doesn't randomly pick off the healthy, the elderly, and the infirmed. Jim DeMint agrees with what I've been saying for 3 weeks today. Why didn't we just quarantine them and take care of them and go to work? Well, because we are a people who are utterly terrified of our own shadow. And so now here we are. And what does fear do to you? It allows you to believe that, let's say it's double the 45,000. It's 90,000 deaths because China's lying. You want us to believe through that lens of fear that 2 times that many, more than 2 times that many are going to die in America alone when we have better sanitation, better hygiene, we don't have wet markets, we have better healthcare, everything. You want us to believe that. The only way you can possibly believe that is because you're terrified of your own shadow. That's not science. That's not reason. That's just panic.
And do we not have precedents of that morphing in and being called science in other arenas in our culture currently?
Yeah, which is why
they're legion. And I use that word on purpose. They're legion, in fact. Yeah. Exit question. What is more likely to happen between now and April 30th? President Fauci falls out of favor with Donald Trump, or Trump sticks to this 30-day extension all the way to the end? What do you think is the more likely outcome of those two? Aaron.
I really want to say A, but I have no hope whatsoever at this point, so I'm going with B.
The latter.
You think it's the latter?
Yeah.
Shannon, what do you think?
It depends on what the conservative media does and what the base.
I will tell you, I don't know that you can keep Trump's attention on anything for 30 days. That's a long time. That is a long time. And, Rush just came back. I didn't listen, but a friend of mine told me he just came back from his cancer treatments and was already questioning this, like his first day back on the air.
Yeah.
What's that, Shannon?
No, I heard it yesterday.
Right.
I was surprised. I was very surprised how hard Rush was, not only on the all of the measures he's putting in place, but also on the stimulus package, the infrastructure package.
Right.
He was tough. It was good.
Yep. I'm still seeing it in my audience. Even people who have not liked my previous positions on Donald Trump are just as ornery and upset by and large as they were a week ago. So we'll see if he can keep his attention on this for 30 days if the pressure continues to mount there. All right, we'll come back and talk about where that pressure may come from here next, live and on demand on Blaze TV, radio, and podcast. Stay tuned. All right, back here live and on demand on Blaze TV radio podcast. Steve Deace here with Todd and Aaron McIntyre, Shannon Joy, New York talk show host. Let's continue with our weekly look at the week that was the Deace Group. Let's get to issue 3, Unemployed Lives Matter.
A study from the University of Zurich in Switzerland examined the effects of the 2008 global financial collapse on mental health and the likelihood of suicide. The study showed that despite a decrease of around 1% per year risk of suicide between 2000 and 2011, quote, in all world regions, the relative risk of suicide associated with unemployment was elevated by about 20 to 30% during the study period, end quote. Couple that study from 2015 with the news this week that an additional 6.6 million Americans filed for unemployment in the past week, bringing the total up to about 10 million since the shutdowns started, and the economic ramifications of the Wuhan coronavirus could be utterly disastrous.
So Aaron cited the University of Zurich study from the Great Recession a decade ago, and I think that's a key data point, that even during a time period when overall suicide rates went down, suicides as a result of unemployment and the various depression, despondency, etc., actually went up when the overall rate went down. This week, we hit a higher unemployment rate than we did during the second year of the Great Depression, and it is only going to get higher especially if this continues for another 30 days. When will the lives another Great Depression puts at stake matter? Now, I think you're already beginning to see the pivot that it will. And I said, and you guys can pick this up from here if you want. I told you guys last week, we talked about this on the show, you'll remember, that I thought last week was a game of chicken. That this is obviously a vicious, serious virus, not an apocalyptic event. And so the game of chicken was going to be, Donald Trump's got to reopen, at least get some of this economy going, even if it's incrementally, but inject some confidence into the American people. But he can't do it so early that he gets out ahead of his data and gets disregarded as, cavalier and reckless, and just did it to save his own political skin in an election year. On the other hand, he cannot wait too long so that the media then ends up doing it for him and then uses all of its platforms to make him Herbert Hoover and blame him for the depression that they helped cause with their own hysteria that they drove, and baiting him into this, frankly. And so this was a game of chicken, right? We had those conversations. Yes. I think based on another friend of mine got a phone call from a major newspaper along these lines. I mentioned with the ABC News and CBS News has stories out today. We're not doing stand-ups outside of hospitals to keep that drumbeat going, right? So I think we are approaching the juncture where you will begin to see the pivot of what are the larger societal costs, right? You're seeing hospital layoffs all over the country because they're being told not to do anything except that are elective whatsoever, which is where the big money is at, by the way. All right. So at what point do you think this will occur? Or do you think we're already beginning to see that pivot occur? Todd, I'll let you start this time.
Oh, it's absolutely already happening. You're seeing it in the conservative blue checks that I've been talking about, you shouldn't be going to church. But in the next breath, they're making sure they send out another tweet so they're on board and they got all their angles covered. So in terms of life mattering, it's going to increasingly matter, but not because those lives have inherent dignity. Because if people were thinking that way currently and before this happened, we wouldn't be in this mess. They're doing it to protect their own backsides. Life is good. Your life will matter if it helps my life matter. That's not how this works. We would not be in this position if we had a level of fundamental appreciation to life, what it is, who gave it to us, why it's worth living. That is the problem, and that's why we're parked here. And it's no coincidence why you see that statistic I mentioned a couple days ago, the loneliness factor that's already set in by generation. It's the highest for Aaron's generation. If the oldest people, the one who are the most prone to this disease, are feeling the least lonely because they have not had their entire lives for this constant punch, punch, punch. You are just a random creation of the ooze. And now that's all that Aaron's generation basically has, they have no idea what to do.
Along those lines, one of my best friends was telling me that he asked his dad if he remembered, and I can't remember what flu epidemic it was, like in the 60s, okay? When he asked his dad, hey, do you remember what life was like then? You know what his dad told him? I was a teenager and stuff back then. I don't even remember it. But I can tell you what the gas lines were like in the 70s. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Like it didn't register to him. It was because the assumption was, well, we don't live forever. Something eventually gets you. We can't just, let's do our best to help as many people as we can and mitigate as much of the suffering as we can. But the idea that we can just escape it all together, I hide out in my basement, playing, Stratomatic football with two of my buddies until a vaccine comes along in 10 years. This wasn't an option. The idea that we would just stop living because of this. That kind of goes to what you were talking about. He said he was blown away by his dad. Just was like, I don't know. We just lived our lives, man. I was much more impacted by the gas lines of the 70s. All right, Shannon, you're next. Go ahead.
Well, the question, when will the lives of another Great Depression put at stake matter? And I think the answer is never. I think as Americans, we need to begin to understand that people in positions of extreme power, like Donald Trump and Bill Gates and Andrew Cuomo, have an extraordinarily high tolerance for the suffering of Americans. And that is because you are merely a data point in their graphs, right? They do not care. And I'm sorry to say this, whether you love or hate Donald Trump, he doesn't care about you individually. Okay. He is looking at things cumulatively and in a lot of ways making decisions based on politics, based on his own personal interests, based on what he thinks might be good for the country, but he's not even really getting good information anyway. And in essence, Donald Trump is doing the exact same things that Andrew Cuomo is doing. Their desire for totalitarian power is apparently never satiated, and that exists in both the Republican Party and the Democrat Party. And so I think we need to understand that the megalomaniac control freaks and quite frankly lunatics, because what they're doing is crazy. Okay, what they're doing is insane. And if you have a brain in your head and you've been listening to the things that you've been saying, Steve, and the things that I've been putting out, what they are doing is absolutely insane. So I don't know what their end game is. I really, quite frankly, don't know what their end game is, and I'm not even going to try to guess. But these.
Here's how you know. Can I help your cause for a second?
Yeah.
Here's how you know that even if you don't agree with how she got to her math, here's how you know the math answer that Shannon gave you, even if you don't agree with the formula. Here's how you know she's right. Because this is so insane that this is the point I've also been making this last week. They're teaching 57 genders at Oxford, guys. Okay? Right. They're teaching we're all going to die in 10 years from global warming at Carnegie Mellon, guys. Okay? They're teaching that human life came from single-celled proteins because of amino acids 600 million years ago at Stanford, guys. All right? They don't even believe each other. Stop and think about this. All right? These are institutions that will all go in lockstep when they agree on their own propaganda. And won't allow you on campus to go ask the Ben Shapiros and Matt Walshes of the world what life is like when they try to go speak at places like the Stanfords with a contrarian view, and whether they even let them on campuses. So these are places where they're all in on all the same propaganda, all the same worldview, and even they are looking at the math and they're like, "This poop's backcrap crazy, man. This isn't real." That's how you know what Shannon is saying is true. Because it's not just the Breitbart school of right-wing media doubting these guys. Their own tribe is looking at this stuff and saying, they're like that GIF we're talking about all the time. Guys from Stanford are out in bad mullets, shaking their head, doing WTF. Guys the chicks at Oxford are coming out that study theoretical epidemiology, and they're like, what the is this? What are you doing? This is dumb. And they're all in on all the same propaganda. That's how you know Shannon's right, that this is insane. That the people that are in rote lockstep on virtually everything else don't even agree with each other on this. Aaron, go ahead.
So to answer your question about how many lives will it take from the Great Depression in order to, actually be worth it or what have you, the answer is, as I've been reliably informed over and over again over the last 3 weeks, is that you hate old people. And I would add as well, shame on CBS News for running that right-wing propaganda story about how this is hurting farmers. Am I doing this right? Is that the correct answer? Because that's all we get. All we get is emotionalism and virtue signaling. Anytime these questions are asked, because this is all that we have. I mean, it's the air that we breathe. Apparently, I mean, just in the past 2 weeks, we've been told that it's not pro-life to reopen the account because your 401k is hurting. From right-wing people, from right-leaning people. At the very least, I've seen people who are in positions of leadership at Christian seminaries say that Caesar was right to arrest that pastor in Tampa Bay. Who are we as a people? And this goes back to what Todd was saying. Who are we as a people? We are not the people. We are not the people that we thought we were. We are not the people that we were waiting on. We are not the people who would willingly go and storm the beaches of Normandy. We are the people who cower in fear on our couch because of a piece of guano dropped over. Well, this is the official narrative. We are people who cower on our couches because of a drop of guano dropped in a Wuhan wet market, supposedly 5 or 6 months ago. That's who we are. And again, to Shannon's point as well, the dehumanization of all of this, whether or not we can work from home, to be told that you are being reduced in order to fill in the blank, all you are required to do is stay at home and exist.
Yeah.
As if you're some sort of amoeba.
Yeah.
That should... Guys,
it's demonic. It's demonic.
It is demonic.
And it's in the Matrix.
It is. Yes, it is. It's absolutely right. And that headline, I keep thinking about this over and over again. That headline from the Babylon Bee that we decided was a homily and not just humor yesterday. Man told the job that provides for his family, pays rent, and all the other things labeled non-essential. That's what we're talking about here. It is the inherent dehumanization, and it should not surprise you. Coming from the culture that produced 57 genders and kill and shout your abortion is going to do this to the rest of you. They're showing their teeth to you right now. What are you going to do about it?
Exit question. True or false? The unemployment rate will break the record of 24.9% set in 1933 during the Great Depression if these shutdowns go on past April 30th. Aaron.
Metaphysical certitude.
True.
Shannon.
Yeah, absolutely true. Easily.
Let's just, can we just skip right to issue 4?
Yep.
Without the intro? All right, let's try to come up with a nice fun kicker. What are you guys doing? Aaron doesn't have kids yet, but what are you two doing to keep your kids occupied right now? That was issue 4. All right. How are you you guys have any tips for how you're keeping your kids occupied right now? Todd.
Well, for now, my 2 oldest are still independently training for their track season that they hope comes back. And yesterday, actually, local television station did a interview with my oldest because she's one of the girls who would have returned as one of the likely favorites to win a state title, and you know what that means to you, how you're wrestling with that. So that's definitely going on. Otherwise, there's just little, the girls are cooking meals and just, finding a way to, taking the dogs out for walks, things like that. And now our governor here is under intense pressure. Now
every Democrat in the state is demanding she declare a police state.
Our doctor's little colloquium, whatever, had an emergency session to demand this. And the story was put out with no data, no facts relative to anything else, nothing about the hospitals.
That's what Debbie Burks did yesterday. Yeah. Well, I've looked at the data. Yeah. You're not social What data? Show us. Show us your data.
Right.
No, you're just going to lecture us instead.
So, Governor, like I said, Stay the course. Be not afraid.
Somebody sent me an email today. What's the difference if she declares a stay-at-home? Here's the difference. Because everything's shut down. You can't go anywhere anyway and do anything except walk your dog anyway. Here's the difference. They can arrest you for mall walking. Yeah. It's the only difference is more tyranny. That's really the only difference, because they've cut off the supply, so there's no demand to go to these places anyway. All right. The only difference is they just get more tyranny. That's the difference. All right, Shannon, I hate to do this, but I'm running short on time, so let's go to the predictions. All right. I'll let you go first though to make sure you get yours in. Go ahead.
I think that in about 2 weeks, more and more Americans are going to begin to become alarmed by the economic ramifications. I think right now Americans are really scared of the virus and a little shell-shocked. I have a lot of optimism, and I'm seeing it here in New York, of people beginning to think a little bit further down the road. And so, we can't lean on Trump or Cuomo or anyone in power to save us. But if people begin to think and rise up and demand to go back to work, I think we can see a change in the country.
Aaron.
Yeah, I think by the middle, at least by the middle of this month, Jordan Schachtel's tweet this morning, who has been covering this case very, very closely, he likened this to being eventually, all these shutdowns being eventually like the speed limit. And I think you're going to see, despite shutdowns,
you just can't enforce them all.
Stay-at-home orders, you can't arrest all of us. Yeah. So I think that's what's going to happen. Despite the stay-at-home orders, you're going to see scores of people out and about in a couple of weeks.
You've seen that in New York City. You can't tell 16 million people. You just can't. It's not realistic that they can't do anything. You're seeing that in New York City with the subways. Todd.
More stories from local sheriffs and nurses coming out, pulling back the curtain and showing us how this is a scam. Sheriffs, if there's a lockdown, saying, just like they won't enforce certain gun bans, it's like, hell no, I ain't going to be a part of this.
My prediction is I think the big story that we're going to see trending with this next week in our neck of the woods. I think Dr. Stephen Moore of Heritage, the interview that he gave to Glenn Beck recently, I think it was actually just 2 days ago, what Jim DeMint is doing now. All right, these are people that carry a lot of weight in our movement. Rush Limbaugh carries more weight than anybody in our movement does. All right, frankly, you probably wouldn't have a movement without him, for better or for worse. And I think you're going to see more and more conservatives rise up to challenge this White House from the right, about getting this thing going again. I think that will be the big trend line we'll see next week. Shannon, good to see you as always. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, fellas.
You bet. We'll come back for Hour 2 and Feedback Friday here next. All right, we're back here with hour number 2, live and on demand here on Blaze TV, radio, and podcast. Steve Deace here with Todd Erzen and Aaron McIntyre. I don't know how many of you, Aaron, I don't know how much of our live audience heard that Glenn Beck promo right before we came back. Everybody on Blaze TV and Blaze Radio watching and listening live?
I think it's just Blaze Radio.
Just Blaze Radio?
But I'm not totally sure.
Well, because I wanted to know, because I didn't want to repeat it if everybody had heard. But we just played a promo from Glenn's show saying, hey, call your governor and tell them to tell the banks to suspend these mortgage payments for 3 months. That's a hell of a lot better idea than $1,200 to people that doesn't really cover almost any of your nuts anyway, in terms of what your overall nut you've got to crack for your family budget. And you can't, and then whatever's left over, it's not like you've got anywhere to go and spend it and do anything with it anyway. All right. So, I mean, and by the way, what's the most important asset, almost investment any American will own at any point in their lives, unless they, obtain a matter of material independent wealth? What is it? It's their own homes, right?
Yes.
I mean, the last thing we want to see is a bunch of people who can't. This is where we get the farm crisis that happened in Iowa in the 80s, as I've explained before. Is you had a lot of farmers who, in terms of the assets that they had, the land, the equipment, okay? Those assets that they had equity in were valuable, very valuable, but they still had debt liens on them as well, despite that equity. Meaning things that appreciated in value higher than what they had purchased or borrowed the money to buy, but they still owed a portion of the money that they borrowed back. And they weren't liquid enough now that they could pay those bills. And so how did they come up with the revenue in order to pay off those liens? Well, they had to liquefy those assets. And now you sold off your farmland and you're out of business. We're looking at doing that to a lot of American businesses and a lot of American families right now. That would help you guys a lot more. That idea by Glenn would help you a hell of a lot more than the first stupid stimulus bill or any more of them would. But see, here's the thing. Here's the thing, though, to keep in mind. Were you going to say something there?
Well, but this has to do with their psychology that went from optimism to run for your lives. You know, I get, and we said this from the beginning, why, even if the dollar amount is writ large, we can't really pay for, or if we could argue about they need a little more, at least if you had feel like Easter or something close to it was really going to happen, you can understand, okay, well, we're going to trust you guys to be grown-ups to handle this how you can with this money. We're not going to make that decision for you. Without that deadline coming somewhere, whether it's Easter, the week after, if this is totally open-ended, months on end till a vaccine comes, you've given us no choices. That $1,200 is utterly meaningless to us. That's the point.
But what you did do, though, is burden us with more inflation and devalued the power of that spending money, even when we can use it again because of all the debt that you just saddled us with in the process. So why do they do it this way? Do you want the answer to that question? I'll answer it for you. Okay. Remember during the years, and I don't know if you guys worked here when because Obamacare happened before you guys came to work here, right? Is when it was enacted, was 2013, right? Okay. So back in those days, I used to point out, you know what they could have done? Let's just say at face value, we have 15 million Americans that are uninsured, that want insurance, all right? Not as Aaron was until last December, single, healthy, and I don't think I need to, I'm not going to the doctor that much. People let's just say there's 15 million Americans that want health insurance that cannot obtain it. Pre-existing conditions, or single mom that's working 2 or 3 part-time jobs, can't afford a premium, and none of those jobs offer that benefit, right? Okay, that person, all right? Here's what they could have done. And this is the difference between a liberal and a leftist. What the old liberal would have done is looked at a program like the Hawkeye program here in Iowa, and other states have them as well, and said, well, hey, we appreciate those efforts and models, but you guys don't have you don't have the wherewithal to address the problem. It's a national problem. All right. And so, because what if that person gets a job and leaves and goes to a state that doesn't have a Hawkeye program? What do we do? All right. And what they would have done is they just would have created an expansion of Medicaid, which was part of Obamacare, but not what Obamacare was really about. They just would have done a massive expansion of Medicaid and let you, without being means tested, just if you couldn't afford health insurance, you can get access to that. They would have just done that. And it would have been a massive growth of government. But that's the way the old liberal would have thought. The old liberal would have thought, how do I use government to do for people what they can't do for themselves? So why didn't they just do that? Why do we have to have community ratings and men pay for pap smears and everything else? Why do we do that? Because what is progressivism about more than anything else? What's it about?
Power.
Power and control.
Yes.
If they had done it the way I said, that the old liberals would have done it, then they could not have. See, community rating and those sorts of things are about power. If they had done it that way and not completely destabilized the system, they wouldn't have gotten the power and control that they really want, because that's what they really want, is the power and the control. The helping the 15 alleged a million uninsured who can't buy their own insurance is that's the gizmo that the ghetto pass I latch onto to get me to the end game that I want. Because they could have just done it they could have massively grown government without destabilizing the private healthcare market. But that wouldn't have given them the power and the control that they want. So that's the same reason why you're getting these stimulus packages, as opposed to, hey, you know what? These banks, you guys bailed them out 10 years ago. They're bailing you guys out now. It's their turn to return the favor. All right. So everybody gets 90 days, no mortgage payments, no liens on your property that you have to pay for. All right. And they're not, and it's a forgiveness. All right. It's year of Jubilee. Right out, biblical law. We're forgiving that. We're taking that time off of your debt calendar. We're just removing it. All right, you've been given forgiveness. The banks have got enough money, and you bailed them all out 10 years ago. They can do you this solid for 90 days. That would be far more beneficial. The idea that I don't have to, I make a good living. I'm not rich, but I make a good living. That would help me a lot. I can't imagine what somebody to know that hey, if this thing were to go haywire, the worst is the worst, because now I can dedicate that money to making sure my family's got food and everything else, right? But that wouldn't give them the power that they want. Let me give you an example of what I mean. A good friend of mine told me today that his business was looking at taking advantage of the small business bridge loans that they're offering. Okay, and what I'm about to say is not to discourage you from taking advantage of it. Please, that's not my point. I'm simply relaying to you why this good friend of mine is not going to do it. This good friend of mine is not going to do it, though, because he's done a lot of, he's negotiated a lot of big money deals for other people. Goes to Hong Kong, he did, on a regular basis to negotiate big money deals for other people. He's not adverse to paperwork and documentation. But now when it comes to his own small business, the amount of documentation that the government wants, the things they want to know about him and what he does with his money, and keep in mind, this is a guy that deals with the IRS and everything all of the time. He's like, I'm not comfortable giving them that information. I don't know why they're asking me for they don't need that. They're asking me for information they don't need. Why do they need more than I already give the IRS every year? I'm not doing it. See, in the end, remember, Mnuchin stood up there yesterday, who's a big lefty, by the way. And he's dreadful, and he's a big lefty. Mnuchin stood up there yesterday and said, we're sorry that we crushed all your businesses, and the way that we're going to repay you is you borrow from us your own money. It's your money. You borrow the money, how we're going to help your businesses, you borrow back from us the money we already took from you. That's the plan. See, in the end, it's about power and control. If the governors of North Dakota and Iowa have already shut essentially everything down, but the migration of the people will be severely limited anyway, because there's almost nowhere to migrate to. Like if you got up tomorrow morning on a Saturday, Todd, and the Erzin clan said, we just cannot do this anymore, where would you go?
Right.
Where would you go? Maybe to some park where you're not out in the middle of nowhere, where you're not in any danger of a mass gathering. That's literally like the only place that you would go. Walmart, Target, you're essentially in one, basically. No. They just want the shelter in place so they can have the tyranny, so they can have the power, and they can have the control. That's always what this stuff is about. The power and the control. The power and the control. That's what's going on here. And props to Governor Gavin Newsom in California yesterday for just saying it out loud. Hey, this is our chance to reimagine things. It's what I told you last week. There is a cultural Pearl Harbor happening right now. Now, before I get to Feedback Friday, I'm going to tell you something that may upset some of you. But I'm telling you this because the good news with Donald Trump is he's like the weather in the Midwest. If you don't like where things are at right now, stick around. Like in an hour or two, if not in a day or two, you might have a totally different take. I mean, the psychology of me and my friends around the country in our private conversations about Trump, I even see it amongst the three of us here in our own little world. Where at any given point, my group of friends that I work with on stuff around the country, at any given point, man, within that small group, there's a couple of us that hate his guts right now. There's a couple of us that want to run through a wall for him right now. And then there's a couple of us that are just so bored. We're so bored with the up and downs. We just don't even want to have an opinion anymore. And then it just rotates. Who within our group, and we are all like hard right wingers, okay? It just rotates all within our group who has that take at that particular point in time. All right. So I'm telling you this now because the one thing with Donald Trump that is both frustrating but also hopeful is he's malleable. Donald Trump failed his presidency this week. He failed the people that elected him this week. That press briefing that went on Tuesday was, pardon the expression, deplorable. To offer people literally no hope and to tell them that even if they follow these models and do everything perfect, we might kill as many people in America as died in World War II. With no idea, no defining of what victory looks like. It was just dreadful. Dreadful. What's followed these last couple of days, I mean, we just went way off the grid to discuss drug traffickers. I mean, to me, that tells you that they know Tuesday was terrible because now they're trying to come up with something else.
Yeah, the very next day was America.
Yeah, they know it was bad. His chief expert has failed him and failed the country, I believe. And just won't stop talking. But he doesn't have anything to say, nothing meaningful to say. And now today it is, we can't trust the models that I said we had to listen to President Fauci to shut the country down. We can't trust them. But, and then the ones that when Trump was going to open things back up, I demanded we listen to keep things shut down. Now we can't, enough. Okay? He's cornered right now. This is an extraordinary circumstance, man. The amount of presidents, this is Bush post 9/11. This is Kennedy getting up the morning after losing the space rates to the Soviets and the Cuban missile and missiles in Cuba. This is FDR getting a phone call on a Sunday morning. Sir, our entire naval fleet was just sneak attacked. This is a state legislator from Illinois getting elected to the presidency, and then there's shots fired at Fort Sumter. This is extraordinary. Even someone with that whose character no one really ever questioned, and who was thought to be a philosopher king type of presidential candidate, would be in way over their heads right now. Last week, I urged you to support him, have his back while he was having yours. Here's what I think we need to do this week. I think this week, sometimes you got to pick your leaders up off the ground. Sometimes they need a hand up. And there's a great scene in the movie Darkest Hour, and Todd, you alluded to it a few days ago, where Churchill is besieged by experts. We must surrender. We cannot win. We cannot rescue our boys that are strung out there on the English Channel, out there on Dunkirk. We're going to lose. That's the rest of our armada sitting right there, dead as a doornail. We need to negotiate now while we still have some leverage, get the best deal we can get. And everybody's on him. And he gets some advice from King Edward. Go listen to what the people have to say. Because now he's beginning to doubt himself. Because the reason that Churchill had a checkered political past and belonged to both major political parties, he'd made a couple wrong calls in the past. And his reputation was kind of, So now he's doubting himself. Maybe we really can't win this fight. I misread this. And we do need to negotiate. And he jumps on the train, or the British version of the subway, basically. And I doubt this happened in real life, but the power of this scene from a storytelling perspective is incredible. It's probably the best scene in the entire movie, don't you think? And the whole movie's got great scenes.
And I bet it happened in various ways. And they packaged it
just
to
not
give
like
it,
one, epiphany moment.
Right. Yeah, that's how you do movies.
And he gets on that train and he just starts talking to the average people. And the average people are like, hell no.
It may as well have been Braveheart on that train, just like Sons of Scotland. It was awesome.
Women who haven't seen their husbands, who have been on the war front for more than a year, haven't seen them, don't know if they're alive. All right? I mean, didn't socioeconomic status doesn't matter. And the people are like, basically better dead than red. Okay? I mean, they were like, no way. You know what? I'm fine meeting my maker. If the choice is meeting my maker or Sieg Heil, I'll take my odds in the next life, brother. Basically, everybody's stance. Sometimes your leaders need your leadership. Because again, your personal opinion of him is irrelevant. He's the only person with any real power in this country who has shown they're willing to at least listen to you. Maybe he doesn't always do what you want him to do, but he has shown he's willing to listen. That's the first step. And his team's failing him. At least his medical team is. Some of it's his own fault. He's given them too much power, ceded too much of his authority to them. But I can understand why you might do that when you're in over your head. I'm up against an invisible enemy. How much do you even say on a daily basis to blame China for this? Because is it worth going to war with China? Who knows? Maybe it is, but the tentacles here, guys, are I mean, is Euclid, was that the Greek, the great Greek mathematician, right? One of them, yeah. I mean, Euclid could not do the math that the president of the United States is being asked to do right now. Because everything's a butterfly theory. Everything's a rubber band effect. Everything I do is going to have the law of unintended consequences. And what happens is when you get into a situation like that and you can't make the math work, you get paralyzed. And you're not sure, you freeze. What do I do? One of the things I've tried to teach my son Noah, the more and more he steps into manhood, is you're better off doing the wrong thing as fast as you can than doing nothing.
Learn from it and then do it again.
Yeah, because you can at least learn from that mistake and there's still time to make up for it. But freezing and doing nothing, all that did was just lose time that you otherwise at least might have learned a lesson. You at least might have learned a lesson, right?
Yes.
So if you're not, first of all, if you know what the right thing is, do that first. But if you're not sure, take a chance on doing the wrong thing first before you decide to do nothing. Okay? He needs to hear from you again. I mean, they were going to bring in all these visa candidates from these other countries, including China, until Tucker Carlson spoke up last night. Now, suddenly, they've just completely reversed. That's an example of what we mean. They need to hear from all of you. Because right now, all he's hearing from is a guy who went out there and told people with HIV that as long as you still have it but can test negative, keep having sex with other people, and we'll decriminalize it. That's his expert right now, Anthony Fauci. Deborah Birx, how many positions has she taken these last couple of weeks? She doesn't know. And you know why they don't know? Because they're human beings, and some things on this earth are beyond us. We cannot solve everything. And somehow we still have to manage for life to happen. I went and looked the other day because some people are talking about whether the football season is going to get canceled or not. And there's a lot of comparisons to this in the Spanish flu pandemic after World War I in 1918, right? You know that in 1918, even with the lack of medical technology, sanitation, they still played a college football season that year. I went and looked it up. That was Michigan's first year in the Big Ten Conference, was in 1918. Now, it was limited. They didn't play as many games, but they still had a life. And by the way, we may decide, and we may get more data, and you know what we may find? It would suck, but we may decide, guys, maybe we can't play football this fall. I don't know that we can. I just don't know that we can't either. Sitting here on April the 2nd, we're making lots of leaps without data that I've been telling you for 2 weeks when I was doing their math, their data is not reliable. And now Fauci's telling you their data is not reliable. Their models aren't reliable, which is where they're getting the data from. But we made all these preemptive, we injected all these preemptive threats to our way of life. And see, the bureaucratic mind will not admit it's wrong. That's why we weren't given a plutocracy of bureaucrats, but a representative republic of people accountable directly to us and the God our rights come from. I can't even imagine what is going through the mind of Donald Trump on a daily basis right now with everything that is coming at him. Winston Churchill probably saved Western civilization in the last century, or at least he saved it long enough for the United States to save it. That's the minimum of what he did. The minimum of what he did is he saved it. He held on to it long enough for the United States to do it. He might have even done much more. That's the minimum, though, that he did. Still, at some point, he needed to hear from the everyday people. The everyday people that don't have the that don't have the luxury of data tables. That have had to learn there's more to life than Tiger King. He needs to hear from you. The people that put him there. He needs to know if he steps out with his you-know-what flapping in the wind here, you're going to have his back. That you understand that there is, unless we have, and it could happen, where this burns itself out in the summer like what happened in the first SARS, that could happen. I don't even think that's even a remote, I would rank it higher than a remote possibility based on my own research. I wouldn't go to the handicap, I wouldn't go to Vegas and bet on it, okay? I don't think we can just, I don't think the odds are so good that we can just go ahead and just say, let's just hunker down till we get to June and July when the weather gets warm. But I think the odds are at least reasonable that this could burn itself out when that happens. But in the meantime, who is he listening to? I think he needs to hear from you. And he needs to know that if he takes that risk, because that's the job of a president. This is no time, as Margaret Thatcher said to George H.W. Bush, at the day before they were going to launch their attack to free Kuwait. This is no time to get wobbly, George. And that's a guy that saw war. That's a guy that ran the CIA. That's a guy that, George Herbert Walker Bush was a guy that saw the soft underbelly of human nature. It didn't live on Wall Street, the financial sector. Even he got wobbly. I think he needs to hear from you. I think he needs to know that if he takes the leadership role here, factoring in all of the considerations beyond just what the disease will rot, that you've got his back. Because I would imagine it's real lonely over there at the West Wing right now. I would imagine there's a whole lot of people, what do you mean we Lone, taunting right now. What do you mean we Lone Ranger? Where they're stuck. Because you know why they're stuck, guys? Because this is not a nothing burger. It's bad. It's bad in the places where it's bad. But it's also not nearly as bad in every place else as they told us it was going to be. But at the same time, we're making unprecedented infringements on our liberties. We have shut down an economic engine that the world needs to beat something like this. It needs, when we had to beat the Nazis, what did we do? We fired up the American economic engine. We shut it down. Now there's talk today, maybe it's come out, I haven't seen, that they're going to go ahead and they're going to recommend masks in public now. I don't know. Well, where are all these masks going to come from? Who's going to make all these masks? You know what Mike Lindell, God bless him, over at MyPillow is going to need to make masks? You think Mike can make all those masks himself? What's he going to need, Todd? Workers, right?
Yes.
He's going to need workers to do this.
And a supply chain.
Yes. And then workers to then engage that supply chain to get it from here to there. Because you can't buy China's masks. How many countries have found that out now? How many people are dead in Spain because they trusted thousands of Chinese masks? He was always going to have to make a calculation here. There's no way around this. There's no ideal solution. Even if this thing burns itself out in the summer like the first SARS, we economically cannot survive just sitting in our homes for another 2 to 3 months until every day it's 85-degree weather gets here. We can't. We're at 10 million jobless claims right now. But I would imagine there's a lot of people at that White House right now telling your president what he cannot do, what he should not do. Probably not a lot of them sitting over at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, giving him the courage of what he needs to do, what he must do, what he can do. You cannot do this job alone. It's probably pretty lonely over there right now. And you could tell a week ago at this time, his instincts were, we cannot do this to ourselves. We cannot have the cure be worse than the disease. Well, what's changed? It certainly isn't reliable data. We know that now. That's not it. What's changed is he was willing to go out there on that limb, and a whole bunch of people were looking at him like, we'll be over here blaming you for it later. Even the apostles needed to put their hand, they needed to put their fingers through the nail-scarred hands. You cannot ask more of Donald Trump than you cannot ask more faith of Donald Trump than what the apostles who witnessed the risen Lord demonstrated when first asked to act on that which the experts said was untrue. I don't believe you can sit around and just wait for him to act. I think you're gonna have to give him the confidence to act. And I think it's got to come from you and people like you. Because the experts right now, the bureaucratic state, most of the people that wanted him impeached the last few years, they're hunkering down playing Operation CYA right now. Time for the people to give him the pick-me-up, like Churchill got in that great scene in The Darkest Hour. We'll come back and do some Feedback Friday here in a moment. All right, so pardon me for some abbreviated Feedback Friday here. We'll get to in a second. I just wanted to encourage you guys to give someone who needs the feedback right now a lot more than we do, and literally holds the power of life and death in his hands, and that's the president, okay? We'll get to the feedback now that you've sent to us, brought to you by RidUZone. If you are one of millions of Americans right now spending way too much time thinking about food because there ain't much else to think about while you're sitting at home, and the grazing is now becoming more like the harvesting. All right, get those portion sizes and cravings under control with RidUZone. It is the only FDA-accepted product that includes OEA. That's the naturally occurring molecule that helps you feel full faster and burns stored fat so you can reduce your calorie intake. And that makes it easier to resist those cravings that can be a son of a motherless goat right about now. So if you want to give RidUZone a shot, you can only get it by the website, riduzone.com, RIDUZONE. RIDUZONE. That's how you spell RidUZone. Use my name, Steve, as the promo code when you go there. They'll give you up to 65% off and free shipping when you go to riduzone.com. That's a great offer. Up to 65% off and free shipping when you go to riduzone.com, promo code Steve. riduzone.com, promo code Steve. All right, let's get to some of the feedback you've sent to us. This one's a little lengthier than we typically would. In fact, the first couple are. But I'm making some papal exceptions right now, given where we're at. Because I also think what these two individuals have to say is important. This is from Carl Clark in Houston, who says, a couple of questions. First, we can all agree after all that has transpired over the past few months, the United States, if not most of the West, should distance its reliance on China for its wholesale cheap production of goods, especially key goods that are crucial to national sovereignty, like medical supplies, technology, building supplies, etc. In this day and age, has this pandemic and panic been enough to alter enough of the public mindset to take steps necessary to disengage from China and take matters of production key to our national sovereignty and national security back into our own hands? And if so, what would be realistic steps to alter the imbalance? We've got to make sure, Carl, that we win the first argument first, and then we have the second one. So right now, I think we just stay focused on the first one. Because in the end, if you win the first one, necessity becomes the mother of invention. If we agree we must do that, that's how we'll come up with the methods to make it happen. If we wait until we have the methods of happening to do it, we'll argue against ourselves. We first must be convinced that we have to do this. It's a national imperative. And then when we do that, that history of our country shows that's where we come up with the methods to make something happen. The second, he says, though, ties to the first. Listening to your podcast earlier this week, you were discussing the mortality that was baked into the cake with previous generations of Americans, those who grew up listening to their previous generations that witnessed the War of 1812, even the Civil War, and still settled the Western frontier. It made me think of listening to stories from my grandmother, living on a farm in northern Iowa during the Great Depression, setting the table with plates down to not collect dust before the meal was served, having German POWs as farmhands during World War II, and even siblings she lost during childhood due to sickness and disease. All the while, as you said, all of society was not shut down to sit at home and do nothing. However, as one of the few going into work on Houston freeways this morning, I was driving by countless restaurants, movie theaters, shopping centers, entertainment centers while listening to your discussion on the country's history of motivation for action. And it made me pause and think on the dichotomy of my grandmother's stories of mortality, struggle, and sacrifice, which ironically make for great stories, with the interplay of my current surroundings, one of the largest cities of America, of comfortable consumerism, and it's mainly stocked by China. Have we become the generation so easily succumb to panic that the only answer is to shut down all of society, sit at home, and do nothing because, well, just look around you? We have ceded our productivity to China, our worship to pop culture, and our religion to the state. And in doing so, exchanged steak for Cheetos, as you used to say. Have we so far removed ourselves from the mortality baked into the cake of our ever-increasing secular society, surrounded by the complacency of cheap culture or creature comforts and Netflix, that we have inflicted ourselves with virtue signal paralysis and lost the motivation for action, even exchanging inaction as action? Yes. You're nailing it here, dude. This is a homily right here, is what this is, okay? I hope this all can be a wake-up call and cure for the paralysis, which is why I'm interested in any strategies and an answer to question 1. But knowing that human nature and our current representation in Congress fear it will not result in a cure, but is a manifest symptom of a society that has a far greater illness. Yes. There is one fact that does remain. God will bring this about in his own time. He is the blessed and only sovereign, the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, the only one who has immortality, dwelling in unapproachable light. No one has seen or can see him. To him be honor and eternal might. Amen. That's from 1 Timothy 6. Still can't wait to gather the grandkids around and tell them stories about the great Chinese virus, Wuhan flu, coronavirus, COVID-19, SARS-2 pandemic of 2020 around the turn of the century and regale them with stories of how we all blindly listened to the experts and just went home to watch Tiger King on Netflix.
We got to post that on social media, maybe.
That is cash money, homie.
Alpha and Omega.
Yeah. Let's go from the meta to the personal. This is from Bill Ollinger in Davenport, right here in Iowa. Bill says, I wonder how many seniors are like my mom, silently suffering through this lockdown. My mom is 94. She is the sweetest, kindest person you'd ever meet. She loves God more than any person I know. Her family is everything to her. This lockdown is killing her spirit slowly, but I can notice it. The government has taken her favorite things from her, going to daily mass, receiving Christ via communion, seeing her family. She has gone to daily mass every day of her life since she was 5 years old. She even goes to church 2 to 3 times a week to the chapel and prays before the Blessed Sacrament for an hour each visit. She can't do any of this now, and I know she misses these things and us dearly. She raised 9 kids with my dad. My dad died about 12 years ago, and she lost 3 of her boys between 2005 and 2008. She said losing a child is harder than losing her spouse. My mom hasn't seen a lot of heartache in her life, but her motto is, I'm the little girl the Lord spoils. She has no fear of death. She's actually looking forward to the day when she's with her Heavenly Father and family, God willing. She misses her family badly right now. My siblings, even those who live out of town, have tried to visit at least every couple of weeks, and the ones in town stop by to check on her regularly. Since this shutdown, I'm her only contact because she lives with me. No visits from her kids, the grandchildren, friends. She suffers from dementia, and this social isolation has done her mind no favors, as she doesn't get much stimulation by just watching Fox News all day. And her hearing is really bad, so she can't talk on the phone. If this lockdown continues for much longer, I'm going to have to talk with my siblings and my mom and see if she wants us to continue the isolation, because I don't think the status quo is what's making her happy. And what good is staying alive if you aren't living? What good is staying alive if you aren't living? I'm sure my mom would say she wants to see her kids and her grandkids, even if it's just for short visits and a hug. This isolation could be a more deadly killer for seniors like my mom than the virus, as people need to feel like they're a part of a community, family. We need to keep a connection with one another. I love my mom more than any other person on this earth. I want her to be happy, not slowly having her spirit stripped away. We're more than a survival rate. And I wish there were more. I wish there were more widow-ologers from Davenport, Iowa out there, 94 years old, who lived in a country that used to know that. That death comes to us all. We only live in a country like this because of people who are willing, in the youth, the prime of their lives, with all of that untapped potential, they were willing to risk never getting to be maybe even parents, let alone grandparents, because they thought it was worth you and I having that opportunity to risk their lives for us. And right now we're being lectured to about how to save lives by people like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, who think that the way to transform third world countries is to kill their offspring before they're born, because we have to limit the surplus population. With no regard of, could one of those persons you killed have come up with some futuristic irrigation system we can't even contemplate right now? Like, if you could go back in time 150 years ago in this country and tell people that they were going to be able to flush the toilet and get running water that they were safe to drink in the same room, they'd have looked at you like, burn the witch. This is what witchcraft is this? There's no way this could happen. And we just take it for granted now. How many of those babies the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation recommended countries in places like Africa and other impoverished areas of the world kill before they're born? Do we know? How do you know what the potential of every one of those children were? That one of those children would not have come up with some futuristic irrigation system that would transform that entire continent. Do you know that?
No.
We don't know that. That one of those children was going to be to Congo what Thomas Edison is to the United States. Or Henry Ford. Do you know that?
No.
We don't know that. We don't know. And those right now are the people that we are relying. We've put our entire civilization into their hands. Anthony Fauci's greatest claim to fame before this moment was isolating the HIV virus so people with it could go out and have sex and not be criminalized anymore. That's literally his greatest claim to fame until now. Making sure people with HIV can still have sex. And he right now literally holds the entire fate of this country in his hands. That I don't even know what to say to something like that. I love sex. So does my wife. We love it a lot. That's why we have 3 kids. But a day will soon come. I'm 47. She's 45. A day will soon come that there's not enough blue pills in the world that will probably make it so that we can, if we live that long, we can still get to enjoy sex. Does that make our lives any less meaningful at that point in time?
No.
No, it doesn't. You know why? because then we enjoy the children and grandchildren that our love of sex gave to us. We get to enjoy that part too. There's more going on here, folks. We're more than a survival rate, man. I mean, this is... What good is staying alive if you aren't living? I don't know who Bill Olliger of Davenport, Iowa is. I don't know if we've ever met. I don't know. Don't know what he does. I don't know what his IQ is. I'll tell you that. I'll tell you this, though. I'm confident in saying this. This line from Bill Olliger's email. What good is staying alive if you aren't living? I can tell you this. That's the smartest damn thing you've heard. It's smarter than anything you've heard from the White House coronavirus task force this week. I'll tell you that. It's wiser than anything you've gotten off of a cable news channel, except for maybe the Tucker Carlson show this week. I can promise you that. There's more mercy and truth in that statement than any of your governor's shelter at home orders. I promise you that. That's some solid food right there. That'll preach right there. That'll inspire. That'll give you some what for right there. That'll wake you up. That'll get the Rocky music going right there. That will. We're still waiting to flatten the curve that we thought was going to be here 2 weeks ago, and we think it will be here. We're not really sure. How about maybe the end of May? That's what Pence was telling conservative leaders yesterday. I kid you not. You just weren't on that call. Some of my friends were. That's what they heard. I don't know, man. If this is a cultural Pearl Harbor, I'm going to tell you right now. Whatever trench Bill Olliger of Davenport's in, I'm jumping in that one. Got a chance to win that fight. We still might lose, but at least we got a chance to win. And I'm choosing Bill Olliger of Davenport, Iowa over Anthony Fauci any day of the week, and brother, twice on a Sunday, if you know what I mean by that. Give me a nation of Bill Olligers of Davenport, Iowa with their 94-year-old mamas over, well, we can't trust the models. America was built by men like Bill Olliger of Davenport, Iowa, and his 94-year-old mama. They made this country. That's the bureaucratic state that is paralyzed with fear and paralyzed this country with fear. They're the reason you get to have a bureaucratic state. They did all the living and dying in this country. They paid all the taxes and the bills. And now at a time that we need that spirit maybe more than we have ever needed it in this country, maybe ever, we told Bill Olliger of Davenport, Iowa, and his 94-year-old mama, who buried her siblings during the Great Depression, sit home. Get the munchies, Netflix and chill. Hell no. That's a lie from the pit of hell, is what that is. Waste your last remnant of God-given talent. Don't say one final goodbye to grandma and grandpa. I didn't tell you guys this. You know what I did? Amy and I sent the kids to see their grandparents this week on their anniversary on the 31st. Why? Because it's been 14 days. No one showed any symptoms. Enough. 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 What good is staying alive if you aren't living? I wish I would have read Bill's email on Monday. I could have just called in sick the rest of the day, rest of the week. I'm done here. That's it. There's nothing else to say, nothing else to do. Bill Olliger of Davenport, Iowa is Augustin. At least he is compared to the leadership we're getting from President Fauci right now. John 3:17.